Hello everyone, this is last video for this year. This is going to be just a summary and attempt to understand the future, what future holds for us, what 2023 is. So let's just start with the summary of what's been going on since the beginning of this war. So first of all, I just want to highlight it for everyone. This is not the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is war between West and alliance that includes Russia, China, and Iran, and many more silent sort of partners in that alliance that want to change the world order, the status quo that we know since 1945. And this is essentially, in this way, in many ways, it's very similar to World War I, where Germany wanted to change the world sort of order at that time because it gained economic power and it felt it was limited politically while having more economic power. So the same way, this is from China perspective, they view that they have economic clout, but they don't have political clout. So they want to translate that into political power and the changes in the world. And also in that way, then that political sort of power will convert into more sort of economic power, right? So it's kind of like a virtuous circle for China. For Russia, this is revenge for the fallout of the Soviet Union. This is an attempt to maybe rebuild the Soviet Union. An extremely poor attempt. Nevertheless, there was, Russian president believes that he's on a mission to do something special, and so he understands that his time is sort of running out, and he decided to do it sooner than later. So that's just that sort of part of the, forces. Then on the West, Ukraine is fighting for its own survival, right? Ukrainian population, Ukrainian citizens are fighting for their own right for self-determination. That's what this war is, mainly for, and that's why it's a just defensive war for Ukraine. Then, there is obviously US that helps Ukraine. That help is obviously self-serving. It's obviously desire to weaken Russia, contain Russia, and so on, which is natural desires. No problem with that. Everybody understands that in Ukraine, but the interests aligned, so to say. And then Europe, that's sort of kind of caught in the middle between all of this colliding worlds. And, it's part of the West, and it was sort of forced to participate, to contribute to help Ukraine, and also suffers economically much more than anybody else. Well, I'm not talking about Ukraine, right? Oh, and I forgot, then also include Belarus, which is essentially extension of Russia. So it's, in many ways, this war was very clear that's going to happen when Russia effectively interfered in Belarus elections and helped current Russian Belarus president to be, in quotes, re-elected. He did not have, majority, so it was falsified, but there was some discontent and it was squashed. Significant number of people died. Nobody intervened. It was first domino in this whole chain reaction. Unfortunately, everybody was just kind of looking in the other side and didn't pay attention, didn't want to get sort of involved, thinking that things will just pass by and it's just Belarus, people, sorry for you, but That's just your life, sad sort of future for you. And however, that was the first step in a Russian strategy to have this Belarus as a bridgehead and a sort of like a buffer zone versus the West. Once they, gain full control of Belarus, then the next logical step was Ukraine. It's very interesting that right before invasion of Ukraine, there was some kind of like a political fight in Kazakhstan where Russia got involved and essentially helped the current president to be there, to be sort of, gain power there. So many thought that sort of turmoil in Kazakhstan will derail invasion of Ukraine. Probably delayed it, but did not sort of derail it. So now let's actually kind of quickly review the whole year and what happened and what sort of things, how things happen. So at the beginning, Russian sort of commanders, Russian top was absolutely overconfident, thinking that this is going to be just police action involved using army for the police action for the most part. And there were actually a lot of this Russian guards, troops, which are part of they are sort of in like third silo, but they're closer to police than to military. So the idea was that once Ukrainians see these huge columns of troops and everything, they will just fall down, similar to how it was in 2014 in Crimea. And especially the Ukrainian president Zelensky was extremely unpopular going into this war. That was very clear, like he probably would have been impeached and would be removed from the power in 2022 on its own if there were no invasion, because he came on promises of change in the country in 2019. He actually did anything but change, so essentially fooled everyone. It became very clear by beginning of 2022, he's just another completely corrupt politician, right? That has its own corrupt group that basically looting the country blind and doing nothing beyond just that. And things were really getting out of control in the country economically, even from electricity perspective. There were predicted shortages of electricity because the energy market would not work properly because, again, it was corrupted. So everything was sort of going in a wrong direction. It was very clear that sort of kind of like popular uprising was building up against Zelensky. February 24 changed everything, right? So most people thought that he's gonna flee. He did not flee. He decided to fight. He decided to stay. Also, there was expectation by many Western experts that Ukraine will hold for 3, 4, 5 days and it will just fold. And from a European perspective, which was even, I think, shown by Germany, that they were hoping for that, because that would be, another Belarus, right, in 2020, just die and, but we keep relationship with Russia. Didn't happen that way because Ukraine is a different country. Very different DNA and very different DNA from Russia, first of all. And I would say in some ways different DNA from Europe. So, Ukrainians, and I want to specifically highlight Ukrainian citizens decided to fight. So what, as I said, Russian military made complete miscalculation by thinking that this is going to be police action using military, as I said, and some so effectively militarized police troops. So they did not have, they were hitting with their fingers spread instead of using a fist. So they attacked here from north of Kiev, then from east. They attacked from everywhere. They attacked from south here towards Mykolaiv, towards here Mariupol and Melitopol and so on. So they were attacking from all directions. They were too spread out. They were too thin. As a result, they sort of made this like thin red lines to, let's say, Kiev, to Kiev from east, to Kherson, Mykolaiv, and in this whole region, then whole region towards this whole like Azov region. So, but just want to explain, because on the maps you see like, okay, the whole territory is being sort of painted, whatever you painted was red or blue. But reality was that Russian troops had like really thin red lines basically along the roads. They did not control the territory, nor they did not have troops to control the territory. And estimated number of the waning force was about 200,000 troops. So, as I said, they spread thin. They obviously, because it's a huge number of troops, they still managed to sort of arrive to Kyiv, which was the main objective of this invasion. Despite all of the stories that Russia main focus was here in the south or even east, or this Donetsk region, the main focus was obviously Kyiv. The hope was that Kyiv can be sort of captured within a couple of days, and Ukrainian top will either flee or will be captured, killed, whatever. Just sort of like Afghanistan 1979, what Soviet Union did there. That failed from the very beginning, as I said, because of the Ukrainian sacrifice of their ordinary Ukrainian citizens, who were literally using personal drones to detect Russian troops, to attack them, because the roads here, it's a very foresty area, swampy foresty area north of Kyiv. So it's a very good area for guerrilla warfare. So, and that's sort of kind of what's happening there. Eventually, the deaths by 1,000 cuts was painful enough to Russian troops, and Russian command made the right choice to withdraw. It took them about till end of March, around March 28, 27, 29, 30, they withdrew from all of this northeastern part of Ukraine. But before I jump there, let's look at the Ukrainian command. Ukrainian command is completely inept and clueless. So they were expecting that the attack is going to happen here in the Donetsk region. So they were hoping that the attack will be from Mariupol to basically Severodonetsk. That's where the main attack is going to happen. So all of the resources were focused there. As a result, and then resources here on the between Crimea and Kherson region were very little. It was just, I think, 2 brigades there. So as a result, Russian troops managed to achieve a lot here in the south. That was there was significant success of the Russian troops in the southern Ukraine, in Kherson and Mykolaiv region, and I would say also Zaporizhya, all of this, and encirclement of Mariupol. All of this south was undoubtedly success by the Russian troops. The reason is because Ukrainian military command completely miscalculated where the hit is going to happen. Otherwise, beyond the south, everywhere else at the first phase, Russian troops lost, essentially. From the very beginning, it was clearly. They didn't capture Kharkiv, They lost there, even though it was possible to capture it. They lost tremendously around Kyiv. They did not have any success here on this Donetsk front line. So things were not going well from the very beginning there. So this is the first phase from February 24 till, let's say, end of March. And that's where the most of the Russian gains happened. After that, it's a slow but very clear sort of loss of Russian Russian let's say rollback of the Russian initial Russian advances. So the first end of March, they lost all of this north and northeast of Ukraine. And I just want to make another note that Ukrainian troops could pursue retreating Russian troops and could inflict significant losses. It was not done. So there is very high chance of some kind of agreement between the two sides, between the two basically political groups, where they say, okay, you let us leave, and without sort of inflicting any losses, and we're going to leave, and it's going to be win-win for both, right? Russian troops will leave without losing much in terms of actual troops, equipment, and so on, because it was very clear that they would lose, territory-wise. And for Ukrainian side was for Ukrainian, not I would say for Ukrainian political top. It was an excellent political victory, right? Without doing anything, they can just say, oh, we won, we managed to push Russian troops out of the northern Ukraine, while in fact they did not. Russian troops left northern Ukraine not because of the actions of Ukrainian political top, but because they were exhausted by the relentless attacks of Ukrainian citizens, who died in large numbers doing that, by the way. So, at the beginning of the war, Ukrainian army was about 250,000 troops. So, number-wise, in terms of soldiers, Ukrainian troops outnumbered Russian troops from the very beginning. Russian troops outnumbered in equipment, especially tanks, artillery, which is the most critical part. Also, air force, right? At the same time, Air Force, Russian Air Force, the ability to use it started to wane pretty quickly. And I would say within a month or so, the effectiveness of Russian Air Force was essentially, if not zero, but was very close. Efficiency was not there. And just to kind of touch on that, and for the remainder of the war, it just essentially non-existent, not a power on the battlefield at this point. And Ukrainian Air Force essentially never existed. It's just extremely small, also does not affect this war. So essentially, the air war was probably first 2-3 weeks. After that, both sides realized that the losses are so heavy that they cannot afford air war anymore, and it essentially stopped. There is some, uses or attempts to use the, helicopters or tactical bombers, but that's just more sort of exception, not the rule. Let's put it this way, and more for propaganda purposes. So after the first phase, Russian command decided that they want to sort of, get decisive victory somewhere else, right? So they lost the first phase. They felt they needed to have a victory somewhere else, and so they started this offensive from Izum area down south, and then from the area where I'm showing here between on the edge of Zaporizhya and Donetsk region, where they started building this pincers. So they wanted to create large encirclement of Ukrainian troops that were concentrated here, west of Donetsk. And so the whole, let's say, April, May, they were attempting to do that. Eventually, they realized it's failing. They stopped. That was sort of another phase that was happening. After that, Russian troops switched to the new approach of just simply squeezing Ukrainian troops in frontal attacks. So then it was Severodonetsk. They captured Severodonetsk. They captured Popasna, Lysychansk. That was, say, June or early July. That was another sort of phase. At the same time, Ukraine received this HIMARS system, I think sometime in July, and started attacking bridges across Dnipro River here, which were essential for supplying Russian troops on the Kherson bridgehead. From that moment, the destiny of Kherson bridgehead was doomed. It was just a question of time before Russian troops will lose it and retreat to eastern side of Dnipro River. But it took quite a while, a long time before that actually happened, because this was important jumping board for the renewing attacks in Ukraine. Essentially, that's a jumping board to capture Odessa and move sort of more in the northwestern direction, and essentially in capturing Zaporizhya, Dnipro attacking. So this could be, was important strategic bridgehead for the Russian troops, so for Russian command. So they held to it for as long as they could. Once they could not, they obviously left that. Then the August was kind of like just a mid grinder without much progress, and then in September, Ukrainian troops. Also, just want to say that during all of this time, Russian troops were not getting any sort of replenishment in troops. So they become much smaller in size, probably down to 150,000, down to 140, 30,000 troops, actual boots on the ground that could fight, basically. While Ukrainian troops still maintained this 250, probably the time was 300, 400,000 troops. So this went much, it became much larger. And also the favor in terms of equipment started to slowly moving to Ukrainian side, and specifically Ukraine started to receive significant numbers of long-distance, high-precision howitzers, such as Caesars from France, then Panzerhaubitze 2000 from Germany, Krabs from Poland. I think Susanna's didn't come then, but it was enough to change the tide plus HIMARS systems. All of that was enough to create counterbalance to Russian artillery, even if it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't total domination of the Russian artillery at that point. So then was just this kind of like August where it wasn't visible, but it was clearly that the initiative is moving from the Russian side to Ukrainian side. Russian troops still managed to do some small, tiny gains, but essentially they were sort of done. This was strategic dead end for the Russian side, for Russian military command, because without new resources, they could not even continue attacking, but they could not even hold what they gained so far, what they controlled so far. And so Ukrainian command decided to attack in the best moment when your enemy is the most exhausted. And so the offensive started, this Kharkiv-Izum offensive or Kupiansk offensive started early September, I think September 8, 9, or 10, one of those dates. It was not actually a surprise, I would say, for people who knew. It was sort of a surprise for external observers. But the Russian commanders were reporting that Ukrainian command is building up. resources there and ready to attack. And even without sort of Ukrainian troops, Ukrainian command does not know how to do offensives. Ukrainian troops are not trained properly. There's no coordination. Even with all of that sort of imperfections, just because Russian troops were so exhausted, the offensive was successful. So that was obviously a big shock for Russia. That was, I would say, let's say, finish of the phase 2 of this war. So Ukrainian offensive starts the phase 3, which essentially, say September, October, beginning of November, Ukrainian side was on offensive, managed to liberate a significant amount of territory here between the rivers of Siversky Donetsk and this tiny river near Svatove. So this whole area managed to liberate Kherson and Mykolaiv regions, or most of the Kherson region, to be not most, but let's say the western part of the Kherson region. And as a result, during this phase 3, Ukrainian side exploited sort of weakness in numbers of the Russian troops. Once Russian troops, at the same, if you remember, end of September, Russian president announced mobilization in Russia, and they were starting throwing quickly some troops onto the front line. It wasn't enough, but eventually that was enough to stop advances of Ukrainian forces. So again, Ukrainian troops managed to, this was phase 3, right? Ukrainian sort of counteroffensive, let's call it, which was, for the most part, it's September and October. Then we got into this phase number 4, which is a stalemate, where there's enough of Russian troops on the ground, Russian soldiers, to effectively control the area that Russia has at this point. And then the Russian command decided to turn it into in this phase 4 situation into mid-grinder, to the war of attrition. And the sort of mid-grinder area was decided to be this whole Bakhmut, what I call North Donbass front line. This is where it's going. This is just a mid-grinder to exhaust Ukrainian troops, soldiers, to depress morale by the heavy losses, and exchange Wagner mercenaries, who a lot of them are from people released from jails. So from a Russian perspective, it's not valuable human material that they are okay exchanging for Ukrainian soldiers. So this is what we experiencing up to right now. So this is November and December. At the same time, it's very clear that Russian troops now have, Russian command has more troops, that most of the units get replenished. And we're looking to some kind of renewed offensive by the Russian troops. The question is only timing. Is it January, February, or potentially March? I would say March is probably very unlikely. By that time, Russian situation in Russia may become extremely difficult, and so they also don't have they cannot wait for that long. Let's put this way. So this is where, and in the parallel, Russian side decided to start attacks against Ukrainian power infrastructure, power grid, which was pretty successful. Essentially destroyed Ukrainian power grid, power distribution network, It's still, it's still one system, but it's definitely in coma. At this point, no economic activity effectively can be done in Ukraine. So that really undermines Ukrainians' ability to continue fight. The only sort of saving grace is the support from the West, from financial support from the US, from Europe. That allows Ukrainian government to exist and fund troops and to have some kind of resemblance of life. At the same time, for majority of sort of independent economic population, there are no economic opportunities. So this is delayed sort of problem that's gonna come to within Ukraine in terms of internal political fight sometime in 2023. Because once people exhaust their savings and there are no jobs, no economic opportunities, and there's no support from the government, something will happen. Let's put it this way. And while I'm not saying that this is a reason for some kind of revolution, it would be could be a trigger, because there is a lot of problems in Ukrainian society that's not being resolved. As I said, this Ukrainian top is completely incompetent, corrupt, and basically a parasite on the body of Ukrainian citizens, that basically exploiting this war for their own benefit. And eventually, it will become clear for the Ukrainian citizens that this parasitic class is not leading to sort of positive outcome. So this was just I reviewed what happened in 2022. Now let's just I'm gonna, and even I a little bit jumped ahead into the future. So now let's look and one more thing in terms of, I didn't cover Russia. Russian economy was severely damaged, and I'm focused more on internal Russian production of goods and services. Entire industries were wiped out, and that also creates a lot of economic problems in Russia. Obviously Russia is a much larger country, much larger economy. So the damage is not sort of anything similar to Ukraine. The damage in Ukraine, I would say, is total. So sort of basically there's nothing sort of alive or anything. While in Russia there is damage is extensive, but not a fatal one. Let's put it this way. So again, our Russian economy is quickly, I would say, dying, and things will get worse exponentially for Russian economy, for Russian financial system, and for Russian government finances in 2023. The perfect yardstick is the exchange rate between Russian ruble and US dollar. It got to 72.5. Now it's a little bit retreated, couple rubles, but the sort of change is there. Basically, Russian government at this point is issuing unbacked credit to finance the war. And that really undermines the rest of the productive economy, because there's inflation starting to sort of show up in Russia. And essentially, this is just a question of time before Russian economy really starts to go south in very quick fashion. At the same time, Russia managed to maintain export of its energy resources to China. Thanks to China, it's still functioning. If there were no China, no India, no Turkey, no Pakistan, and so on, the collapse in Russian economy would be happening much, much, much faster. Because there is this external supply of resources, more specifically from China, that allows Russian economy to sort of still float. And even if it's getting worse, it's still not in catastrophic shape. So this is where we are. Both sides have total resolve to sort of to win in the war. Russian leadership, I think, just today announced that we will not stop until we change regime in Kiev. And similar position is in Ukrainian side. So there's no even sort of sign of reconciliation. There's no exhaustion from the conflict. Both at the top, at the sort of top of the society, and also at the societal level, on individual level. Both sides deeply believe that they're doing right things, and I do want to say that Ukrainian side is doing right thing, is just trying to defend itself. So that's where the truth is. At the same time, Russian propaganda works pretty well. The population there has always been subjected to very heavily state propaganda. So you don't really need much to kind of like have to produce necessary results, let's put this way, in Russia. So this is where we are, where we're going into 2023. So what's sort of let's say, my view on 2023 for both countries? Both countries, as said many times, are heading to their 1917 moments. And by that I mean the Russian revolution in the Russian Empire. That's probably a better way, because it's not Russian, it's a Russian Empire. So there are many nations there, ethnic groups, and so on. And it's unfair to call it Russian. So the first was a revolution in February of 1917, and there was a coup in October, November, depending on which style they use, of 1917. And that happened because the so-called revolution didn't really resolve anything. So as a result, then you're going to the next level. Then it's going to be a coup and dictatorship. And so to resolve the problems. And so both countries facing internally, societally, the same magnitude of the problems that Russian Empire was facing in going into 1917, and sort of the sort of can has been kicked for a long time, since 1991, in both countries, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Belarus, and essentially all of this former Soviet republics that become independent in 1991. And so at this point, there is no opportunity to kick the can anymore. And so that's why I say that both countries are heading into their own 1917 moments. What's going to be triggered there is totally unknown. It's unpredictable. But it's very likely that sometimes toward the end of 2023, by that time, at which time I don't know, both countries will experience those 1917 moments. What kind of powers will come sort of in Russia and Ukraine is is hard to say. One is clear, that neither Ukrainian top, which I said many times before, is completely parasitic and incapable of doing anything, and incapable of addressing countries' need, will be removed. And the same is true for the Russian top. In terms of Russia, I would say there is very clear chance that there will be even more sort of hardcore dictatorship in Russia than the current Russian president. So we may look at the current Russian president as a nearly perfect person. If things will go at the direction, sort of, let's say, passive least resistance in Russia. And passive least resistance in Russia leads to very hardcore dictatorship. And sort of one of the faces could be the head of this Wagner group, Prigozhin. He's ready for that. He's extremely energetic. He is, I would say, intelligent and intelligent evil mind. That's how I would describe it. So, and he's very entrepreneurial. So he has essentially everything you need to come to power. So we'll see what happens in 2023. May not happen. Maybe it will happen 2024. Remains to be seen. But that people who will replace Russian president are going to be much more hardcore. Because in the West, there is some kind of delusion that, it's a problem of Russian president. No, it's not a problem of Russian president. It's, I would say, problem of the Russian society. It's similar to how, the Stalin was not a problem. This was not a, maybe it's not. So the Stalin and his regime, it wasn't about Stalin. It's about society that former Soviet Union society was. That was the true face of that society. The same way as Nazi Germany was not about Hitler, it was the face of the German society at that time. So again, this is never about some kind of one person who drives the entire society in some crazy directions. It's actually society that really drives, and it just finds the leader who basically expresses the will of the society. So just want to make it clear, because there's this completely delusional point of view that somehow removing Russian president will change something. It will not. Will actually bring even more hardliners into Russian power. So again, both countries are going into this 1917 moments. What will happen after that is totally unpredictable. In terms of the human losses, both countries are approaching, pushing towards 50,000 people dead, meaning soldiers. I'm not talking about civilians. That's another large number. It probably could be on the Ukrainian side as high as another 50,000. It's even harder to to estimate. That is very painful for Ukraine, for Ukrainian side. There's 50,000 because relative to population, it feels more, right? For Russia, 50,000 still doesn't feel as much because the country is at least 3.5 times larger in terms of population, right? So if you really try to compare apples to apples, effectively, you can maybe increase Ukrainian losses by 3.5 times, and essentially it's 175,000 people versus 50,000 people, right? So that's just so you understand the magnitude within the societies, right? Or you can reduce Russian losses by 3.5 times and call it I don't know what it's going to be 15, 17,000. But effectively, that gives you sort of understanding where each country stands in terms of dead soldiers. That starts to, and then also I mentioned yesterday a little bit about this 15,000 of missed in action soldiers that were declared by Ukrainian government. And I explained yesterday that most of them were dead. And actually, I forgot to mention, to explain what's really happening. In many ways, they are intentionally classified as missed in action by Ukrainian sort of military and government, because then you don't need to pay out financial support to the family of the soldier who died. So this goes back uh, to the Soviet tradition. The same was happening during World War II, where most of the Soviet soldiers were sort of missed in action, never found. Nobody knows where they died. There's no, I would say, cemetery, no nothing. Just sort of disappeared. And the same idea was there as well. Is okay, if someone dies, there is a formal sort of death certificate. The Soviet government has to support the family, and because there were so many dead soldiers, they cannot afford. So that's how you kind of, government effectively releases itself from um, from supporting the families of those who died, essentially. And it was even intentionally the way it was done. The Soviet soldiers did not have this personal ID tags. They had at the beginning of the war, they had on piece of paper, which essentially, as you can imagine, it just doesn't survive time or anything. So it's essentially makes pretty much everyone unknown soldier, right? Unknown dead soldier. Versus for the German army, they had this, aluminum was, if I remember, steel ID tag, so you can pretty much always identify, fallen German soldier. So the Soviet army was effectively army of soldiers with no names, just a large meat grinder machine. They didn't care about the individual soldier, and so as a result, significant number of soldiers, they missed in action forever. So something similar is going on right now with Ukrainian side. It's extremely depressing, extremely criminal, in my opinion, of the Ukrainian government. And, I've been always extremely critical. This is just another reason why I believe Ukraine, this current political top, is disaster for the country and will not lead it to any positive outcome. Now, actually, let's look at that. About what's going to happen. So if this war of attrition continues the way it is, I would say, unfortunately for Ukrainian side, there is no positive outcome because Ukraine cannot fight with quantity; it needs to fight with quality. I was saying this from the very beginning, from March, that the only way hope for Ukraine is to fight with quality against Russian quantity, because Russian side is fighting with quantity, and that's okay for them. That is a sort of viable strategy for Russia. Just because they are 3.5 times larger, people-wise and economy-wise, it's about 10 times larger. So you have resources to waste. Even it's wrong to say about people as resources, but that's how they viewed by Russian command, Russian political top. They're just resources to be used to achieve the goal. And unfortunately, in Ukraine, it's the same way. Ukraine, as I said, probably a week or 2 weeks ago, about this new law that was passed by Ukrainian parliament, which is essentially pocket parliament of Ukrainian president. So it's not a parliament, let's put it this way. It's just the tool to approve whatever Ukrainian president wants, to legalize, let's put it this way. And so at the request of Ukrainian head of staff Zaluzhny, that parliament passed the law that essentially makes old Soviet tradition of the Soviet army that if you don't follow the order, you go to jail. At least they're not getting shot on the spot like how it was in the Soviet army. But it's effectively very similar approach. That really is the worst thing that Ukrainian military top can do to Ukrainian army, because it's not the army of the slaves. It's never, never had that sort of spirit of the slave army. The only reason Ukrainian army was fighting because it's in a way, it's an army of the warriors. So it's not even correct to call them soldiers. There are some soldiers, but the spirit is of the warrior, which means it's an independent person who fights for his own interest. And turning them into this Wagner mercenaries that are being shot if they not, fulfill the orders. Basically, turning them into the slave army will definitely not gonna work and actually gonna backfire. And so that also means that Ukrainian military top is incompetent, doesn't know how to continue this war. They don't understand how to change the situation from the quantity to quality perspective. And so the one-for-one exchange in terms of losses will continue. And things will get worse, progressively worse for Ukraine in terms of pain in 2023. And that's why I'm saying that at some point in 2023, the 1917 moment is going to become very sort of realistic for Ukraine. Not that the Ukrainian sort of society decide to, give up and not fight with Russia, but it may be happening something similar, maybe like was in France, slightly after French Revolution, when the France was fighting sort of civil war within, and then there was fighting the invasion forces of Austria, UK, Russia, Prussia, and all of those other countries. So this might be happening something similar in Ukraine. France managed to sort of, thanks to the Napoleon, to sort of come as a winner from that fight. We'll see if Ukraine will come as a winner from that fight. That's a big question for Ukraine, for Ukrainian society. For the Russian society, for Russian top, they will continue exchanging this one-for-one in the hope that eventually it will exhaust Ukrainian society, which again, big miscalculation, which it will not. But eventually the falling Russian economy, Russian finances out of control, and sanctions, lack of technological replacements in Russia will lead to extremely difficult situation in Russia, which again may trigger 1917 moment. So, as I said, this whole mid-grinder will continue well into 2023, and we may see renewed Russian offensive sometime, probably end of January, early February. That's what I would bet on that, if I have to bet. And then afterwards, remains to be seen what's going to happen there. Well, and then another sort of, I guess, the parallel sort of world or sort of related world is this China with its potential invasion of Taiwan. That probably the earliest time that they gonna do it is April of 2023, and then I said earliest, right? Doesn't mean it's gonna happen in April for sure. That's the earliest. Could be as May, could be August, could be June, could be October. May not happen, as I said before. That the essentially China just need to wait for 2 years to gain full control of Taiwan. And the only thing that may force their hand is internal implosion, economic implosion in China, that will force Chinese leadership to channel negative energy from within society, so there is no civil war in Russia, in Chinese society towards this invasion. That's the only big question. In terms of what's happened, let's say if this invasion happens, there will be big problem for Ukraine because US will not be able to support both sides, Taiwan and Ukraine at the same time. It just requires too many resources. US does not have those resources. Europe is completely kind of like got caught naked. They don't even have anything, even already now. So they cannot really meaningfully support Ukraine. This war is in many ways similar to World War One, World War II, where you consume a lot of resources and mostly the shells. Both armies are starting to face, well, the Ukrainian army always faced this shell hunger. Russian army starting to sort of face that too, not as acute as Ukrainian side, but they cannot replicate the same strategy that they were doing in, let's say, April through August of this year. Now they still use significant amount of artillery, there's no question about that, but they need to supplement that with infantry attacks with equipment. So, which also will create eventually higher losses on the Russian side because they need to attack. So this is not going to be just, artillery sort of firewall. This is going to be also infantry waves. Now it's being done using Wagner mercenaries. Eventually those prisoners will run out, probably in a month, 2, 3. And then more ordinary Russian citizens will be filling the ranks of this expendable material. And again, this may feed into this 1917 moment in Russia. One thing I want to mention about how inept and corrupt and unintelligent Ukrainian top is. So Ukraine has this Minister of Defense who has no military background, but he has no also common sense even thinking. He's a lawyer by his profession, and typically lawyers are very logical people because it's all about logic. Unfortunately, this person is completely corrupt, greedy, and unintelligent. So he was actually asked yesterday about the UAVs, tactical UAVs for Ukrainian soldiers. There is a lot of those UAVs from China, which is by DJI. You probably heard about that Chinese manufacturer. So they basically, people in Ukraine, they use their money to buy those DJIs for Ukrainian soldiers, right? And that's a significant advantage since the day one that Ukrainian army had over Russian army on a individual soldier tactical level, right? And so that's being supplied completely by the Ukrainian citizens who donate money, buy it, and so on. And so there, someone was asking him that it's really hard to import those UAVs, tactical UAVs, to Ukraine because it's viewed as a dual-purpose equipment, sort of like military equipment, and requires special permissions and so on. Just so you understand, everywhere in the world, in Europe and in and in the US, it's civilian equipment. There's no limitation. Anyone can get it. There's no problem. In Ukraine, this political top wants to control society as much as possible. Anyway, in many ways, I think they are afraid Ukrainian society more than the Russian invaders. So what they do, they essentially put blocks on import of this tactical drones. And so first thing, this Minister of Defense was defending that block and saying, well, this is how it should be. That's a normal way. I see it as how it should be. So that was the first step. But then it was even more sort of, I would say stupid answer where he basically said, well, I spoke with the generals and they just call it wedding drones because, they used in civilian life, they used for making videos of the weddings, probably also making videos of real estate. There are a lot of uses of those. And these wedding drones are totally useless. We don't really need them, and so on. He started going this idea of we're not even when I'm procuring for 2023, I'm not even buying single one because they're completely useless. So which is obviously absolutely far from truth. It's actually why Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian civilians were able to inflict significant losses on the Russian army, especially at the beginning of the war. And right now they are becoming more and more critical. And so the answer is, we're not gonna buy it first of all as government, but we also will not let you buy for yourself. So this just gives you understanding of how far away from sort of reality this Ukrainian top is. And it's essentially parasiting on Ukrainian citizens and their sacrifice of their own lives and their desire to have their own sort of destiny in their own hands. And essentially this Ukrainian top is, at this point, their parasitic approach is we're going to milk the help, the aid that's coming from Europe and from the US, and we're going to leave off that. And whatever happens to Ukrainian society at large, it's not our business. We have our sort of, things to loot. And, as long as you die there, that's fine with us. So that works for us pretty well. So that's again, another drop in this bucket of why this top is will not lead to any success of Ukraine. And if this remains, they will lead for sure to failure of Ukraine. I don't think that they will stay. I think Ukrainian society is healthy enough to eventually realize it and change it. But because it's a war, everybody sort of hey, we don't want to rock the boat. We want to sort of, everybody's scared to rock the boat, right? And so we are at this stage psychologically within the society where people still kind of hoping, believing, and all of that, which hope is always, it's not a strategy. It's a worst thing you can have, and you hoping is the sure path to disaster. And so there's still that remaining sort of remnants of that hope. As I said, as this is war of attrition, the losses can amount. Things probably will go bad. Eventually, this will force the hand of the Ukrainian society, or it will lead to the loss of Ukraine. So that's just in a nutshell where it's heading from Ukrainian perspective. Russia, as I said, they're very clear as well. I think it's also 1917 moment for different reasons, where there's sort of more other hardliners behind the Russian president, which are actually much worse. I would say, current Russian president is the best sort of the world can have out of Russia at this moment. So that was sort of hopefully, review and summary of what happened 2022 and where we're heading with all of this into 2023. I wish everyone happy new year, and hopefully you're doing whatever you're doing to make this 2023 better than 2022 for you personally. So again, happy new year and see you in 2023. Thank you. Bye-bye.